A love against all odds. The world of privilege. In the heart of New York City, nestled among the towering skyscrapers and penthouses that boasted views of the glittering skyline, was the opulent world of the Kensington family. The Kensingtons were old money, wealthy, powerful, and untouchable. Their name was synonymous with luxury, their legacy etched into the very fabric of the city. Their fortune had been built on a vast empire of real estate, investments, and a chain of luxury hotels that spanned the globe. At the center of this gilded world was Evelyn Kensington, the only daughter of Robert and Margaret Kensington. Evelyn was the epitome of high society, a young woman of grace and beauty, with striking blue eyes that held the same sharp intelligence as her father's and a charm that rivaled her mother's. Her life was a carefully curated mix of charity events, socialite gatherings, and exclusive parties, all while managing her responsibilities within the family business. But beneath the surface of her perfect life, Evelyn felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She was destined to inherit the Kensington empire, and with it, all the responsibilities that came with being a Kensington. Despite her life of privilege, Evelyn longed for something more, something real. She grew tired of the constant stream of suitors who were more interested in her family's wealth than in who she truly was. She felt suffocated by the constraints of her world, where every move she made was scrutinized, every decision weighed against the family's reputation. Her days were spent in meetings with high-powered executives, attending charity galas, and being seen at the right places with the right people. Her evenings were filled with dinners at five-star restaurants, where the conversations were as polished and superficial as the gleaming cutlery. To the outside world, she had it all: beauty, wealth, and power. But Evelyn knew that what she lacked was the one thing money couldn't buy: genuine love. Across town, in a small apartment in a less affluent part of the city, lived Jake Taylor. Jake was the complete opposite of Evelyn in every way. Where she had been born into privilege, Jake had grown up in the hard realities of life. He had been raised by a single mother, Clara, who had worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Jake's life had been a constant struggle, but it had also shaped him into someone resilient, resourceful, and kind-hearted. After graduating high school, Jake had taken on various odd jobs to support his mother and himself. He'd worked in construction, as a delivery driver, and even as a handyman, but it was his job as an errand boy for the Kensington's luxury hotel that would set his life on an unexpected path. The job was far from glamorous. Jake spent his days running packages between the different floors of the hotel, handling the smallest tasks for the wealthiest guests, and doing whatever was asked of him by the hotel staff. But Jake didn't mind. He was grateful for the work, and it gave him a chance to learn about the world of the rich and powerful from the inside. He saw firsthand how different life was for the people who lived in penthouses and wore designer clothes, and while part of him was envious, he never let it show. Jake was a dreamer, but he was also a realist. He knew that his life was worlds apart from theirs, and he was content with that. But everything changed one day when Evelyn Kensington walked into his life. It was a crisp autumn day when Evelyn first laid eyes on Jake. She had decided to take a rare morning off from her busy schedule and visit her family's hotel, where she sometimes found solace in the rooftop garden. The garden was one of her favorite places in the city, a hidden gem amidst the concrete and steel, where she could escape the pressures of decor. As she stepped into the elevator, she noticed the young man standing in the corner, dressed in the hotel's uniform. He was carrying a stack of packages, his brown hair slightly tousled, and a look of quiet determination on his face. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with warm brown eyes that seemed to hold stories she couldn't yet read. Jake recognized her immediately. Everyone who worked at the hotel knew who Evelyn Kensington was. She was the boss's daughter, the heiress to the Kensington fortune, and completely out of his league. He kept his head down, not wanting to draw attention to himself, but he could feel her eyes on him. As the elevator began its ascent, there was a sudden jolt, and then it stopped. The lights flickered, and a voice came over the intercom, informing them that there was a technical issue, and that they would be stuck for a while. Jake felt a surge of anxiety. The last thing he wanted was to be trapped in an elevator with Evelyn Kensington. Evelyn, however, seemed unfazed. She leaned against the wall and smiled at Jake, trying to ease the tension. "I guess we're stuck together for a bit," she said with a soft laugh. Jake nodded awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, looks like it," he replied, his voice more timid than he would have liked. Silence fell between them, the awkwardness hanging in the air like a weight. Evelyn could sense Jake's discomfort, but instead of ignoring it, she decided to break the ice. "You work here, right?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Yeah, I do, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm an errand boy. Mostly just run things around the hotel. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, her curiosity piqued. It must be interesting, getting to see so much of what goes on here. Jake shrugged, feeling more at ease with the conversation. It's definitely different every day. I meet all kinds of people, some nice, some not so much. But it's a job, and I'm grateful for it. There was something in the way Jake spoke that caught Evelyn's attention. He was humble, yet there was a quiet strength about him that she admired. He wasn't trying to impress her, and that was a refreshing change from the men she usually encountered. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked, her tone genuinely curious. "Jake. Jake Taylor," he replied, finally meeting her gaze. Evelyn smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you, Jake. I'm Evelyn, but I guess you already knew that." Jake couldn't help but smile back, feeling the tension between them start to ease. "Yeah, I did. But it's nice to meet you too, Evelyn." For the next hour they talked, the initial awkwardness giving way to a surprising connection. Evelyn asked him about his life, his family, and his dreams. Jake, in turn, found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't expected. He told her about his mother, about the struggles they had faced, and about his desire to one day build a better life for them. Evelyn was captivated by Jake's honesty and his resilience. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was talking to someone who saw her for who she really was, not just the heiress to a fortune. When the elevator finally started moving again, both of them were almost disappointed. They had shared something real in that confined space, an unexpected connection that neither of them had anticipated. As the doors opened and they stepped out, Evelyn turned to Jake, a playful smile on her lips. "Maybe I'll see you around, Jake." Jake nodded, a slight blush creeping up his cheeks. "Yeah, maybe." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the bustling hotel lobby. Jake stood there for a moment, feeling like he had just woken up from a dream. He knew that he would likely never cross paths with her again after all. Their worlds were too different. But there was something about that brief encounter that lingered in his mind, a spark that he couldn't quite extinguish. A blossoming friendship. To Jake's surprise, he did see Evelyn again. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more frequently, often by chance. Each time, Evelyn would strike up a conversation, and each time, Jake found himself looking forward to these encounters more and more. Evelyn's visits to the hotel became more regular, and she made it a point to find Jake whenever she was there. They would talk in the lobby, on the rooftop garden, or even in the staff lounge when Jake was on a break. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter and genuine interest in each other's lives. Evelyn was drawn to Jake's authenticity. He wasn't like the men she was used to, men who were polished, ambitious, and always looking for a way to climb the social ladder. Jake was different. He was kind, hard-working, and unpretentious. He had dreams, but they weren't about power or wealth. They were about making a better life for his mother, about finding happiness in simple things. For Jake, Evelyn was a breath of fresh air. She wasn't the spoiled, shallow socialite he had expected her to be. Instead, she was thoughtful, compassionate, and surprisingly down to earth. She cared about people, and she wasn't afraid to challenge the expectations that came with her name. Their friendship grew quickly, and soon they were spending more time together outside of the hotel as well. Evelyn invited Jake to accompany her to art galleries, coffee shops, and even on walks through Central Park. She showed him a side of the city he had never experienced before, and in return, Jake introduced her to the small, hidden gems that only someone from his world would know. But as their friendship deepened, so did their feelings for each other. Evelyn found herself thinking about Jake more often than she cared to admit, and she could tell that Jake felt the same way. There was a chemistry between them that was undeniable, a connection that went beyond friendship. However, both of them were acutely aware of the obstacles that stood in their way. Evelyn was a Kensington, and Jake was an errand boy. Their worlds were not meant to collide, and they both knew that pursuing anything more than friendship would invite scrutiny and disapproval from those around them. But the heart, as they say, has a mind of its own. One evening, after a particularly long day, Evelyn invited Jake to join her for a late-night walk through the city. The streets were quieter than usual, the city bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic. They walked in comfortable silence, the tension between them thick with unspoken words. As they reached a small park, Evelyn stopped, turning to face Jake. The look in her eyes was one of vulnerability, something Jake had never seen in her before. "Jake," she began, her voice soft but steady, I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something more than friendship for you." Jake's heart skipped a beat at her words, his pulse quickening. He had been wrestling with his own feelings for weeks, but hearing Evelyn say it out loud made it all the more real. "I feel it too," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we're from different worlds. Evelyn, what kind of future could we have?" Evelyn took a step closer, her gaze locked on his. "I don't know, Jake. But I do know that I don't care about the differences between us. All I care about is how I feel when I'm with you." Jake's resolve crumbled under the weight of her words. He had tried to convince himself that what they had was just friendship, that anything more would be impossible. But now, standing here with her, he realized that he didn't want to fight his feelings any longer. Before he could think, he reached out and gently cupped Evelyn's face in his hands. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut as he drew closer. The world around them seemed to fade away as he kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that held all the emotions they had been holding back. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, their hearts racing. Evelyn's eyes were shining with unshed tears, and Jake knew in that moment that he was in too deep to turn back. But as the reality of their situation set in, so did the fear. Evelyn's family would never approve of their relationship, and Jake knew that he could never offer her the kind of life she was used to. The thought of her giving up her world for him was both thrilling and terrifying. "We can't let anyone know," Evelyn said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of determination and anxiety. "At least not yet. We need to figure this out on our own, without everyone else's expectations." Jake nodded, knowing she was right. "We'll figure it out," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. And so their love became a secret, something they hid from the world, something they cherished in the stolen moments they spent together. They continued to meet in secret, their relationship growing deeper with each passing day. But the more they fell in love, the more the pressure of keeping their secret began to weigh on them. Inevitably, secrets have a way of coming to light. One afternoon, as Jake was leaving the Kensington Hotel, he was approached by Gregory Sterling, a family friend of the Kensingtons and a man with a reputation for being particularly observant. Gregory had seen Jake and Evelyn together more than once, and he had begun to piece together the nature of their relationship. "Jake, isn't it?" Gregory asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Jake nodded, wary of the man's intentions. "Yes, sir." "I've noticed you and Evelyn spending quite a bit of time together," Gregory continued, his voice smooth. "You must have made quite an impression on her." Jake's heart raced, knowing that Gregory's words were loaded with implication. "We're friends," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. Gregory chuckled, though there was no warmth in the sound. "Friends, yes. But I'm sure you're aware that Evelyn is. Well, she's not just anyone." Jake felt a surge of anger at Gregory's condescending tone. "I know exactly who she is." "Good," Gregory said, his expression hardening. "Then you'll understand when I say that it's in your best interest to keep your distance. The Kensingtons have a reputation to uphold, and they won't tolerate anything that could tarnish it." Jake clenched his fists at his sides, but he knew there was nothing he could say that would change Gregory's mind. The man represented everything that was wrong with the world Evelyn was a part of: the prejudice, the elitism, the belief that money and status were all that mattered. But even as Gregory walked away, his words lingered in Jake's mind. He knew that their relationship couldn't stay hidden forever, and the thought of what would happen when it was exposed filled him with dread. That evening, when he met Evelyn in their usual spot in Central Park, he told her about his encounter with Gregory. Evelyn's face paled as she listened, her fear mirroring his own. "They'll try to separate us," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "My family. They'll do whatever it takes." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We'll face it together," he whispered, though he wasn't sure how they would overcome the obstacles that lay ahead. The inevitable confrontation came sooner than they expected. One evening, as Evelyn was returning home from a day spent with Jake, she found her parents waiting for her in the drawing room. The tension in the air was palpable, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "Evelyn, we need to talk," her father, Robert Kensington, said, his tone grave. Evelyn's heart sank as she entered the room, her mother's worried expression confirming her fears. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Robert stood, pacing the length of the room before turning to face his daughter. "We've heard some troubling rumors, Evelyn, rumors about you and a young man named Jake Taylor." Evelyn felt a wave of panic wash over her, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What kind of rumors?" "Don't play coy with us," Margaret Kensington interjected, her voice tinged with frustration. "We know you've been seeing this boy behind our backs. Do you have any idea what kind of damage this could do to our family's reputation?" Evelyn bristled at her mother's words. Jake isn't just some boy, she shot back. He's a good person, and I care about him. Care about him, Robert echoed, his voice rising. Evelyn, he's an errand boy. He has no place in our world. Our world, Evelyn repeated, her anger boiling over. Is that all you care about? Your precious world of wealth and power. What about how I feel? What about love? Love, Margaret scoffed. You don't even know what love is. You're young and you're being reckless. This infatuation is nothing more than a fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Evelyn cried, tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. I love Jake and he loves me. Why can't you understand that? Because love isn't enough, Robert said, his voice cold. Not in our world. You have responsibilities, Evelyn, responsibilities to this family, to the legacy we've built. You can't just throw that away for some fleeting romance. Evelyn shook her head, her heart breaking. So, that's it? I'm just supposed to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of the family? Robert's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. We're only trying to protect you, Evelyn. You don't understand the consequences of your actions. If you continue this relationship, you'll be risking everything, your reputation, your future. Evelyn's tears spilled over as she looked at her parents, the people who had always been her rock, now standing in the way of her happiness. I can't give him up, she whispered, her voice trembling. I won't. Margaret sighed, her expression pained. Then you leave us no choice. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? We're sending you away, Robert said, his voice heavy. You'll go to Europe for a few months, get some distance, some perspective. Hopefully, by the time you return, you'll see reason. Evelyn stared at her father in disbelief, her world crashing down around her. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's already done, Margaret said softly. You leave tomorrow. Evelyn felt the room spinning as the reality of her situation set in. Her parents were tearing her away from the one person who made her feel alive. The one person who saw her for who she truly was, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. That night, Evelyn met Jake in the park for what she knew would be the last time. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and the city around them felt eerily quiet. Jake could tell something was wrong the moment he saw her. Her usual brightness was dimmed, her eyes red from crying. Evelyn, what's happened? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Evelyn looked at him, her heart breaking as she struggled to find the words. They found out, Jake, she whispered, her voice trembling. They know about us. Jake's face paled as the implications of her words sank in. What did they say? They're sending me away, Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. Tomorrow. I'm going to Europe for a few months, maybe longer. They want to separate us, to make me forget about you. Jake felt a surge of anger and despair, but he forced himself to stay calm for Evelyn's sake. I won't let them do this to us, he said, his voice firm. We'll find a way to be together. Evelyn, we'll figure something out. Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know if we can, Jake. They're so powerful, and I'm so scared. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if he could shield her from the storm that was tearing them apart. We'll get through this, he whispered, though the words felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming odds against them. They stood like that for what felt like hours, clinging to each other as the world around them threatened to tear them apart. But deep down, they both knew that this was goodbye, at least for now. When they finally pulled away, Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. This was my grandmother's, she said, pressing it into Jake's hand. She gave it to me when I was a little girl. I want you to keep it, to remember me by. Jake looked down at the locket, his heart aching. I could never forget you, Evelyn, he said, his voice choked with emotion. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Evelyn smiled through her tears, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Promise me you'll wait for me, Jake. Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll find our way back to each other. I promise, Jake whispered, his voice filled with a desperate hope. And with that, Evelyn kissed him one last time, a kiss filled with all the love and sorrow she felt in her heart. When they finally pulled away, she turned and walked away, not daring to look back for fear that she would never be able to leave. Jake watched her go, the locket clutched tightly in his hand, knowing that his world would never be the same again. Months passed, and Evelyn's absence left a gaping hole in Jake's life. He continued to work at the Kensington Hotel, but everything felt different without her. He missed her laugh, her smile, the way she made him feel like anything was possible. Evelyn, too, felt the weight of their separation. Europe was beautiful, but it was a gilded cage. She spent her days in a blur of social events and cultural outings, all while longing for the simple moments she had shared with Jake. But through it all, they kept their promise. They wrote to each other, letters filled with love and longing, each one a lifeline that kept their hope alive. They dreamed of a future where they could be together, where the differences in their worlds wouldn't matter. And then one day, Evelyn made a decision. She was tired of living her life according to other people's expectations. She was tired of being told who she could and couldn't love. It was time to take control of her own destiny. She returned to New York, her resolve stronger than ever. She confronted her parents, telling them that she was done living for the sake of the family's reputation. She loved Jake, and she was going to be with him, no matter what it took. At first, her parents resisted, but they soon realized that they couldn't control her life forever. Evelyn was an adult, and she had the right to choose her own path. It wasn't an easy decision for them to accept, but eventually they came to understand that Evelyn's happiness was more important than their pride. With her parents' reluctant blessing, Evelyn sought out Jake, finding him in the same park where they had said their tearful goodbye months before. When Jake saw her standing there with the same bright smile he had fallen in love with, he felt his heart soar. He didn't need words to know that everything was going to be okay. Evelyn had chosen him, and that was all that mattered. They embraced, the weight of the past few months melting away as they held each other. They had faced countless obstacles, but their love had endured, and now, with the future spread out before them, they knew that they could face whatever challenges life threw their way, as long as they were together. Their love story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as they walked hand in hand through the city they both called home, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, with love as their guide. Thanks for being here with me. If you enjoyed this story, please click on the next one and don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe or follow and be part of this beautiful community. Until next time, stay blessed, look for the truth, and be just.